Out a church year, ended a church year with the Feast of Christ the King, always the last Sunday of the church year. And at this Mass, we welcome somewhere between 15 and 20 people into the order of catechumens and candidates that are preparing to be received into our church at Easter. And if you were here last week, you saw that there were some that are young, some that are old, some that were whole families, some that were just single people, so a good mix of people in that group. And we'll be sending them forth today and throughout the rest of the time until Easter in what's called Breaking Open the Word, where they go out because they're not yet receiving the Eucharist. They go out and have a lesson from the Scriptures and talk about that in their daily lives. So we have that to look forward to. So that was all last weekend on the last Sunday of the church year. Today we start a new church year with the first Sunday of Advent. And Advent is traditionally thought of as kind of a countdown to Christmas. And it makes sense that on Friday night, Charlestown lit up their lights around their town square. If you have never been over to Charlestown to see those lights, I encourage you to do so this Christmas season. Just a beautiful display of lights there in Charlestown. Some of you may have Advent calendars, those little boxes that, if you go to the next slide for me, Advent calendars that have just one door each day that you open up for each day, giving your child something to do during that. Christmas parties are all the rage during the month of December, and you'll probably be going to one or two of those as we get closer to Christmas. And then even for many people, the last day, the day after Thanksgiving, is the day that they put up the lights around their own houses or around in their house, put up their Christmas tree. I traditionally do that on Thanksgiving Day or the day after Thanksgiving. I didn't get to it this year, so it'll happen hopefully Monday. I'll be able to do that. And so Advent has been thought of as a kind of a countdown to Christmas. But the church wants us to see it a little bit differently. They want to see it as more than simply a countdown to the commemoration of the birth of Jesus 2,000 years ago in Bethlehem. And they want us to also look at Advent as a time to prepare for the second coming of Christ. That Christ will come either at the end of our lives or will come again someday in glory. As Paul said in the second reading, with his holy ones. And the word Advent itself means that. So Advent itself means two Latin words, ad meaning to, and venere meaning come. So it's a celebration of what is to come and a wake-up call for what is to come as well. Jeremiah talks about in our first reading that from David's house a just shoot shall come. And it's important that it come from David's house, the house of King David, the greatest king. The Messiah would come from that clan of people. St. Paul cautions us and encourages us, may the Lord make you increase and abound in love for one another, so as to strengthen your hearts. And we're going to come back to that phrase. So as to strengthen your hearts to be blameless in holiness at the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ. So this is not celebrating St. Paul. This is not celebrating the birth of Christ. This is talking about Jesus' second coming. And then Luke's gospel says there will be signs in the sun, the stars, and the moon. People will die in fright in anticipation of what is to come. Kind of this cataclysmic event that's going to happen at the second coming. And then Jesus cautions us in Luke's gospel, beware that your hearts do not become drowsy. Certainly, he's not talking about getting tired and falling asleep because all these great things are going to happen, cataclysmic events. We're going to not sleep through that. So he's saying, don't let your hearts fall asleep. Don't let your hearts become drowsy. And so I want to talk a little bit about those two parts, where Paul says, so as to strengthen your hearts, and then Luke's gospel saying, beware that your hearts may not become drowsy from carousing and drunkenness. Maybe Luke knew something about those Christmas parties we all go to. So today I'm beginning a 4-part, an Advent homily series called From the Heart of Jesus. And this is based on an encyclical, say that 3 times fast, based on an encyclical from Pope Francis. And let me just tell you a little bit about what encyclicals are. Encyclicals are letters that the Pope writes. And sometimes he writes them to a specific church. He might write a letter to the Church of the United States in an encyclical. He might write a letter to the whole church in an encyclical. And every so often, he writes an encyclical to the world in general, to anybody who wants to read it. Laudate Si, he wrote about 7 or 8 years ago on the environment. And that was addressed to everyone, to all people of goodwill. All right. This one is addressed to us as Catholic Christians, his most recent one. And I want to talk about that in a little bit. Pope Francis, this is his 4th encyclical in his pontificate. Benedict the 16th had, I think, 3. John Paul II reigned for 25 years. I think he had 14. So they're not every year you get one, but every 3 or 4 years you might expect one. His most recent one was called Dilexit Nos. And that's a Latin phrase for he loved us. And then he subtitles it on the human and divine heart of Jesus Christ. And so Pope Francis has written an encyclical about the Sacred Heart of Jesus. But he doesn't start there, all right? He will get there. And so throughout this Advent season, we're going to be looking at that, mining that encyclical for a little bit of guidance on how we might prepare our hearts for the Advent season. But he begins with the question of what is the heart? What is the heart? And he says the heart is the core of our being. It's the very center of who we are, the locus of sincerity where deceit and guile cannot exist. It is a place where we are our most authentic self. And one of the images he uses is that a lot of times we have foliage all around us that kind of block people from seeing who we really are, and blocking ourselves sometimes from really understanding who we are. And he says this is a time of year to remove that foliage. And in North America, as the trees begin to lose their foliage and you see the core of the tree, it's a good image for us that we get down to the root of who we are as God's people, made in love, by love, and for love. That's what's in our hearts. And then he goes on to say the heart allows us to examine the most important questions of our lives. Who am I? Why am I here? What is my purpose? Who is God? What do I want to be for others? Who do I want to be for God? And this homily series isn't meant to be an Alpha promotion, but Alpha delves into those questions at a deeper level for us. Allows us the opportunity to delve into those questions at a little deeper level as well. And so, and Pope Francis says in the encyclical that we are made by love, for love, but that we don't always understand that. We don't always understand who we are, and our heart can sometimes deceive us, and we can sometimes lose track of the real essence of who we are, and so he challenges us. So if it's true that we can lose our heart, if it's true that we can get distracted by our heart, misunderstand our heart, then what is St. Paul asking? What is St. Paul asking when he says, so as to strengthen your hearts? So as to strengthen your hearts. And what is Jesus asking when he says, beware that your hearts may not become drowsy from carousing and drunkenness? I think he's saying to take some time this Advent season, to take some time this Advent season to quiet ourselves. The psalmist says, be still and know that I am God. It's a challenge to get beyond the frantic worrying about what gifts you haven't got and what you haven't done and what party you have to prepare for, and really settle into that, looking a little bit deeper at the meaning of this Advent season. So we are asked during this Advent season to let love move us into action. We think of love as kind of a warm blanket, but it's also a challenge. It's a challenge to move beyond the warm comfort and into action, the fire of God's love. We are being asked not to be complacent, but to yearn for more, to yearn for the deeper this Advent season, to yearn ultimately for God. Proverbs tells us that we should tend our hearts with vigilance, for from the heart flows the springs of life. So this Advent season, may our hearts shake us up as well as comfort us. May we see our hearts as both a fire of God's presence and as that warm blanket that envelops us, so that as our opening prayer in our Mass today so that we can run forth to meet our Christ. And we do that with love from the heart of Jesus.